Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. A couple of months ago, we checked out the Asus ROG Swift PG32UQX, a $3,000 beast of a monitor packing 32-inch 4K 144Hz specs, along with full HDR functionality. Not the best monitor I've tested, to be honest, a little disappointing in some areas, and certainly the $3,000 price tag is hard to justify. But for those that don't have the price of two LG OLED TVs to spend on a single gaming monitor, Asus have an alternative product that we're looking at today, the PG32UQ, so basically the non-X variant. This is the same type of monitor, 32-inch 4K 144Hz IPS panel intended for high-end gaming with features like adaptive sync and variable overdrive. But instead of providing full HDR through a 1152 zone mini LED backlight, Asus have opted for a much lower cost edge-lit HDR setup, giving us display HDR 600 instead of 1400. This single change and the removal of the G-Sync module in favor of a regular display scaler has shaved off a whopping $2,000 from the price tag. Now, the PG32UQ is still a high-end monitor, and it's not particularly cheap, with Asus setting a US MSRP of $1,000, but compared to other displays on the market, similar displays, that's not an outrageous price tag and is certainly going to be more tempting than the $3,000 PG32UQX for anyone but high rollers. But it's not just the price tag that makes the PG32UQ potentially the more attractive buy. This display features HDMI 2.1, so you can hook it up to both PCs and the latest game consoles and get a full 120 or 144Hz experience without bandwidth limitations. This is a key feature of a modern 4K high refresh monitor, and annoyingly the more expensive PG32UQX doesn't include HDMI 2.1, which really limits its usability with the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5. No such issues with the cheaper PG32UQ, which is kind of an oddity in Asus's lineup. You get two HDMI 2.1 ports and a DisplayPort 1.4 with DSC. The overall design is, well, we've seen this before. If you've seen basically any other monitor review I've done on an Asus ROG product, you'll know what we're in for here. Three-pronged metal stand legs which look nice and feel premium, then the rest of the monitor is basically standard plastic with the usual ROG gamer stylings. Big RGB LED logo on the back as well. I've said before that I'm not a huge fan of how Asus designs their high-end monitors and personally would prefer a cleaner aesthetic on the rear. However, from the front, the side most people will actually see, it looks fine. In fact, if anything, it's a small improvement on prior monitors, as Asus have replaced the copper highlights on the stand with black, creating a more neutral color palette that will work better with more gaming setups. It is what it is. It's a gamer-styled monitor, and it's certainly liked by a lot of buyers, as Asus, well, they sell a lot of monitors. The stand is height, tilt and swivel adjustable, however it lacks pivot support, so out of the box you can't use it in a portrait orientation. You'll need a VESA mount for that. Height adjustability is okay, probably could do with slightly more height, but at least you do get some adjustability there. There is no doubting the monitor is well built and the stand is sturdy. Then we have the OSD, controllable through the usual directional toggle. Easy to navigate menu system, and Asus packs in a lot of features here, from color controls through to gaming specific stuff like crosshairs, timers, the sniper mode and so on. Asus are one of the better brands for monitor features, and that's no exception here. Next up we have motion performance, and firstly there's a bit of a surprise here for buyers. Despite everything on the Asus website saying this monitor tops out with a 144Hz refresh rate, the PG32UQ is actually a 155Hz display through an overclocking feature included in the OSD. I guess Asus is segmenting out the 155Hz functionality into an OC mode, because not every display will be able to do this in a stable fashion, and also some setups and cables might struggle with the slightly higher bandwidth requirements of that refresh rate at 4K. My units seem to work fine at 155Hz, and in the past I've usually had no problems with OC features either, but just a note here that it may not work properly with every single model. So with that in mind, let's get to testing response time performance at 155Hz across Asus's included 6 overdrive modes, which are listed as variable overdrive. Level 0 is effectively overdrive disabled, and both level 1 and level 2 are quite similar in that response times are slower than 10 milliseconds on average, but produce virtually no overshoot. You're probably not going to want to use any of these three modes for gaming. Level 3 is one of two most usable modes in my opinion. Here we have a 10.3 millisecond average response time, which isn't great and leads to low refresh rate compliance, but overshoot is basically non-existent here, so it could be worth using. And despite somewhat slow response times, cumulative deviation of 659 on average is actually not that bad. Then we get level 4 overdrive, which improves performance to an 8.88 millisecond average response time, and this only comes at the expense of a slight increase to overshoot. With cumulative deviation decreasing now to 624, this is the best overdrive mode we've tested so far, and the ideal mode for gaming at 155Hz. Unfortunately though, this mode still isn't that fast, and refresh compliance below 50% is disappointing, suggesting perhaps the panel isn't quite fast enough for gaming at this refresh rate. Then we get to level 5 overdrive, which is basically the mode Asus has to advertise fast response times. Yes, the average response improves to 4.48 milliseconds, but the level of overshoot and inverse ghosting is significant and very obvious while gaming, making the mode unusable. With these results in mind, I feel that Asus probably should have included a mode between level 4 and level 5, because we go straight from a somewhat slow mode with no overshoot to a much faster mode with tons of overshoot. Something between these modes would have provided a better balance and could have been optimal. Perhaps this display should have had a fully tunable overdrive slider. For gaming across the refresh range, for example, when using adaptive sync variable refresh rate functionality, which is listed as FreeSync and NVIDIA G-Sync compatible, for example, using level 4, there's a noticeable step up in response times when shifting from 144Hz down to 120Hz. We're now sitting at a 6.84 millisecond average response, and that's only at the expense of some overshoot. However, some of those slow fall times are yet to be resolved. Then as we move down the refresh rate scale further, we get fairly similar results until we hit 60Hz, where the level 4 mode becomes a lot worse, which is kind of disappointing. It seems like the variable overdrive tuning goes a bit overboard here at 60Hz and causes quite a lot of overshoot. The other alternate option is to use level 3 overdrive. This mode is a little bit slower at the top end, but consistently has less overshoot, and at 100Hz and below actually has the lowest cumulative deviation value, which suggests it produces slightly better visuals. There is still a fall off in performance at 60Hz, but this time it's much more manageable with less overshoot, so this is definitely the more optimal mode to use at 60Hz. Obviously, the question here is whether the PG32UQ has a single overdrive mode experience, and to be honest, I'm on the fence here. The level 4 mode is slightly better at higher refresh rates, but it's still not massively better, and ultimately still isn't that fast, yet it has problems at 60Hz. Meanwhile, the level 3 mode is pretty consistent, slightly slower than level 4, but holds up well at lower refresh rates. I'd probably choose level 3 for adaptive sync gaming, and it sort of has a single overdrive mode experience, but not a great single overdrive mode experience. It's complicated. At the very least, I think this display could be better tuned. Compared to other displays, the Asus PG32UQ delivers disappointing response performance at its maximum refresh rate. Dare I say poor performance, to be honest. It's no better than the PG32UQX, which I slammed in its review for being slow and using outdated IPS technology. The PG32UQ is simply not capable of the same performance as the best 4K displays of today, including the LG 27GN950 and Gigabyte M28U in the 27-inch class, or the Gigabyte FI32U, which is a direct competitor to the PG32UQ at 32 inches. The FI32U does deliver more overshoot at the highest refresh rate, but it's considerably faster and better tuned than the PG32UQ. The PG32UQ also isn't impressive on average across the refresh range, despite using variable overdrive. The level of overshoot is low, which is good to see, but it's still easily beaten by products like the 27GN950 and FI32U, although the FI32U lacks a single overdrive mode experience and has high levels of inverse ghosting at some refresh rates. Really, neither the FI32U nor the PG32UQ deliver ideal response performance, which is frustrating as the experience with smaller 4K high refresh panels is a noticeable step better. In cumulative deviation, there is some positive news, as we can see the balance between response times and overshoot, and the PG32UQ is more towards the slow response no overshoot end of the spectrum. What's good to see is that in this metric, the PG32UQ is clearly better than the slow PG32UQX. In fact, it's 19% better, which is substantial. The non-X model is just that little bit faster to complete most of the transition and does so with less overshoot, so it benefits in cumulative deviation. However, on the whole, the PG32UQ is still not that amazing and falls behind IPS panels that appear to be using newer, faster technology. Again, the 27GN950, VG28UQL1A, and M28U are examples of this at 27 inches, so for whatever reason I'm yet to see that performance at a larger 32-inch size. The nearest equivalent to the PG32UQ is the Gigabyte FI32U, and here the FI32U is marginally better, 12% better on average, but again, neither of these displays are quite at the level I'd like from a modern high-end IPS monitor. The fastest speeds you'll see from the PG32UQ is at 120Hz, but it's still not overly competitive with other 4K displays, though it does outperform the PG32UQX. At 60Hz it outperforms the UQX model by more, and even beats the FI32U, which suffers from a lack of variable overdrive, but still fails to impress relative to other 4K 144Hz monitors that I've tested. Input latency is low with a processing delay below 1 millisecond, indicating that most lag you'll get is from the moderate refresh rate and slower response times. The FI32U is a step above here. Then of course for the best input lag, you're better off with a 1440p 240Hz monitor in this price class. Power consumption is as expected. This display is 13% more efficient than the Gigabyte FI32U and a decent 35% more efficient than the PG32UQX, suggesting that dropping the mini LED backlight and G-Sync module does indeed save a bit of power and heat output. The PG32UQ does support backlight strobing through eLMB sync, meaning it can be used with or without adaptive sync enabled. When it's used with adaptive sync, this is one of the better implementations I've seen from Asus. It looks like they've put some work in here to reduce the blur that was in this mode previously. The PG32UQ still has some strobe crosstalk as the panel itself isn't fast enough to keep up with the strobing, and you can't tune strobe length or brightness in this mode, but you can adjust the clarity position. This is handy because there's a limited range where you get the best clarity. In the default middle position, there's a lot more crosstalk in the top and bottom sections of the monitor. It's also good to see the eLMB sync mode hold up well at a range of refresh rates, with really no difference to clarity. If anything, there's slightly less crosstalk at lower refreshes. The supported range here is 85 to 155Hz, which is quite reasonable, though it does lack 60Hz. You can also use eLMB without adaptive sync, the one difference here being it unlocks the clarity level feature, which controls strobe length and therefore brightness as well. The level 5 mode is the most clear with the least blur and crosstalk, but also the dimmest. There is no difference in clarity between eLMB and eLMB sync, with eLMB at level 5 delivering basically the same results as eLMB sync, which is good to see. The improvements made here to backlight strobing compared to other Asus monitors means that I would recommend buyers at least experiment with this feature, as it can reduce motion blur in some situations, and overall, I describe it as average to good. It's not a feature that I'd recommend for everyday use yet, but it's not bad on the PG32UQ and helps offset some of the slower response times we've just been talking about. Next up we have color performance. The PG32UQ is an exceptionally wide gamut monitor. Not only do we get 95% DCI-P3 coverage, we also get 100% coverage of the Adobe RGB color space, making this a highly versatile 4K display for content creators. The benefit here is you could be working on your wide gamut images or videos, then later log off from work and start enjoying games at 4K 144Hz. That's the beauty of these sorts of panels, which in this case is providing a whopping 84% coverage of the Rec 2020 color space, higher than most other panels on the market and well above the Gigabyte FI32U. When a panel has such a wide color gamut, this introduces challenges for color performance. Out-of-the-box color calibration for grayscale is strong, with virtually no tint to the white point and reasonably good, but not perfect adherence to the sRGB gamma curve. However, by default for regular sRGB or Rec 709 content, which is the majority of content today, including most YouTube videos, the PG32UQ is hugely oversaturated. This is immediately obvious when using the display and causes the sunburned effect on skin tones, where colors that should be pink to brown are all shifted into the red zone. You can see this play out in calibration comparisons. Grayscale results are pretty good in the upper portion of the chart, but color checker results are totally inaccurate as the wide gamut is left unclamped by default. Luckily for buyers, the PG32UQ does have a functional sRGB mode, which is what I would recommend for using this display outside HDR content. It has some limitations, including locked white point controls, but grayscale performance is okay and the gamut clamp is effective with a saturation Delta E ITP average of 3.25 and color checker average of 3.58. It's not perfectly accurate, but it's generally very good and far better than the default mode. From here we can perform a calibration using Portrait Display's CalMan software, and the final results are excellent in most color spaces. With full coverage of sRGB and Adobe RGB, there are a few issues with those gamuts, while P3 is missing the very top end of the color range, so it isn't perfect but still very good. This is one of those displays that works exceptionally well with calibration and could be used for productivity. No issues with display brightness, as the PG32UQ is capable of 440 nits, higher than most monitors, and sufficient for all types of indoor usage. Minimum brightness though is not great, bottoming out at 82 nits, so it's not the best display for usage in the dark. I recorded quite a decent contrast ratio for an IPS panel with the PG32UQ, and this is without local dimming enabled, which is the default configuration. 1067:1 puts this monitor in the upper end for IPS panels, similar to most modern AU Optronics models and better than the Gigabyte FI32U. However, contrast is still poor in general, as IPS panels are absolutely destroyed in black levels by VA panels and OLEDs. Viewing angles are a non-issue with this display as it uses high-end IPS technology, although my unit did suffer from moderately low IPS glow. Uniformity was okay, could have been better, though not the worst result I've ever seen, and the majority of the panel looks reasonable in this area. Wrapping up the testing, we have HDR Performance. The PG32UQ is a semi-HDR panel because it meets 2 of the 3 main criteria for HDR and has limited local dimming functionality. Brightness exceeds 600 nits, which is what we want to see, and the panel is capable of a very wide color gamut. However, the key area to HDR is contrast, and 6 edge-lit dimming zones is not sufficient for true HDR, though it will have some benefit over SDR in ideal conditions. Sustained brightness is solid at a touch over 650 nits, which is mid-range for an HDR panel, and obviously about half that of the PG32UQX. Similar brightness at a 10% window, so the PG32UQ appears to cap out at this brightness level. Indeed, when measuring both peak and sustained brightness, I reported no difference at all, so the PG32UQ can't push up brightness for short flashes either. Contrast between 2 frames is perfect, so I won't show those results as the PG32UQ can fully disable the backlight when showing a black frame. However, if there is anything at all on the screen, then the backlight will enable, and that limits the contrast ratio quite a bit in ideal scenarios. Basically, rather than local dimming fully switching off the backlight for areas that should be black, the backlight is only dimmed to the lowest on level, which has the effect of capping black levels and reducing the best case single frame contrast to 16,000:1, which is well below the minimum ideal target for HDR content. Then for worst case HDR contrast in the checkerboard test, you get native panel performance, as edge-lit dimming is totally unable to dim small areas and therefore just enables the backlight at all times. This performance is plainly not suitable for HDR and about a quarter of what you get from the PG32UQX. What this means is that in a large portion of HDR content that has complex areas that need dimming or brightening, the PG32UQ is unable to deliver anywhere near an HDR experience. For HDR accuracy, grayscale tracking is mediocre for lower luminance values. Anything below 30 nits is too bright when displayed on the PG32UQ, and black levels, so below 2 nits, are raised as well, which seems to be an effect of the backlight not being able to dim itself enough. Basically, the bottom 5% of the HDR tone curve cannot be displayed at all on the PG32UQ in most situations, as the minimum brightness level of the backlight is too high, which leads to these raised blacks. Above 30 nits though, luminance tracking is good and roll-off around 650 nits is very good. Saturation accuracy for BT2020 isn't great despite covering a lot of this color space. P3 and Rec 709 inside HDR are also a bit oversaturated, especially for greens, but not horrendous. Would have liked to see a bit better accuracy here as this cannot be calibrated, but given the rest of the panel's HDR performance, this is fine. Overall, the Asus ROG Swift PG32UQ is the third 32-inch 4K high-refresh gaming monitor that I've tested, and the second to occupy the $1,000 price point after the Gigabyte Aorus FI32U. I found the FI32U a little disappointing for such a pricey monitor. It didn't quite have the feature set that I expect in this price class, and I kind of feel a similar way with the PG32UQ. This isn't a bad monitor. In many areas, it's actually quite a good monitor. It just isn't quite there in terms of delivering a high-end experience. With the PG32UQ, it comes mostly down to response time performance. Despite being released in 2021, the PG32UQ has last generation IPS response times, failing to get near the best on offer from this panel type today. This causes a bit of ghosting, and while it does have variable overdrive and annoying emission from the FI32U, it just isn't that fast. 27-inch 4K panels have quite a bit better motion performance than any of the 32-inch variants I've tested. I was hoping the PG32UQ would address this and give us top-end IPS speed at this size, but it just doesn't. And while it isn't a super blurry display or anything like that, there's enough of a difference to say it's noticeably slower than the FI32U it competes against. And that's a shame because most other areas to performance are strong. This is a very wide gamut panel which gives it great versatility for both gaming and content creation, especially handy at 4K and at this size, yet it still has a decent sRGB mode for everyday use. Contrast is pretty good for an IPS panel, as is brightness, and the backlight strobing mode through ELMB sync is improved on what Asus has been offering in the past and is going to be usable for some buyers. It also features HDMI 2.1, an embarrassing omission on Asus's flagship PG32UQX. So would I recommend the PG32UQ? Well, to me, it doesn't seem like a $1,000 monitor. It doesn't have the complete feature set I want from a high-end expensive product. But I haven't tested any monitors like it yet that are significantly better. Maybe one exists, but of those I've tested, I'd actually say the PG32UQ is sitting in the #1 spot for now. Yes, it's slower than the FI32U, but it's better at most other things. It has much better gamut coverage, making it much more suitable for content creation. It has better semi-HDR functionality, better native contrast, and superior backlight strobing. It also gets closer to having a single overdrive mode experience, despite generally falling behind in response times. Of the two, I'd choose the PG32UQ, but only at a discount, and hopefully with more testing I will find a 32-inch 4K monitor that is better and definitely worth buying. Anyway, that's it for our testing of the PG32UQ. If you're interested in supporting our monitor testing and all the work that we do, please consider supporting us through our Patreon and Floatplane accounts. Links are in the description below. You'll sometimes get early access if you sign up on Floatplane. We also have our Discord community. You can come ask us questions about monitors, get recommendations, all that sort of thing. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.